Well, we are extremely delighted to have you back and all set for the session that's lined up here. Please note that we will be running two sessions parallelly. This one is on climate finance and the other is on the other side of this hall, which will focus on energy transition rather. Said that, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you to this session on unlocking climate finance in Nepal. That's the theme that we've given to this panel, which will run beginning a few moments from now, and then it will last about an hour, wherein you'll see two very important presentations on the topic or the theme that we've carried, followed by comments from experts. And then we will also open a floor for your question, answers, or queries. Well, one more time, thank you for making it here. We just hope you had a good lunch. Well, we are now set to begin this panel, and we've considered the panel comes as one of the central topics that we want to bring into deliberation and seeks the prospects as IBN looks forward to creating a sustainable development infrastructure course in the endeavors that it is undertaking. For countries like Nepal, ladies and gentlemen, you all are experts in the domain. For countries like Nepal, which is spearheaded to meet its global and national targets, one major hurdle is its climate vulnerability. And this climate vulnerability, which until a while ago, had to face a lot of skepticism at many occasions and at many spheres, at the moment has become a little more realistic, even to those who raised skepticism over the warnings or the caution raised by climate experts relating to the consequences of climate changing, especially given the frequency and intensity and magnitude of the natural disasters that is occurring across the globe, including climate vulnerable countries like Nepal. And in this scenario, it becomes very, very important for governments of these vulnerable areas and the stakeholders to find a course that dwells or adapts to the vulnerabilities, the consequences, in order to do away with the risk factors and also meet the national and global demands that it is headed towards. Said that, our focus or the aim or the object of this particular session is to reap an understanding, or at least enhance our understanding on green finance landscape and constraints from a global and national perspectives. We have invited experts in the field who will be taking you through this particular object that we come up here with. So without further ado, allow me to invite up on stage the esteemed panelists, beginning with the chair of this session, Mr. Rameshwar Dangal, the Revenue Secretary, Ministry of Finance. Can we have you up on stage, please, sir? And this is requesting you to kindly chair this very, very important session. My pleasure now to invite up on stage the session moderator, Mr. Joseph Silvanus, the Managing Director, Dolma Consulting, also a former banker who holds more than 3 decades of experience in the sector. It's a privilege now, ladies and gentlemen, to be inviting up on stage two distinguished presentators for the session. First and foremost, Ms. Teresa Daban Sanchez, who is the resident representative of IMF. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, ma'am. She's a well-seasoned senior economist with more than 28 years of professional experience on macroeconomic issues at the Ministry of Finance in Spain and at the International Monetary Fund. Our second presentator, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. Dhruva Purkasta, the Director, Climate Policy Initiative, India, and he leads and guides the India team in developing innovative finance and policy solutions in support of renewable energy and green growth plans of the Government of India. Having introduced and invited our esteemed presentators, I have the pleasure now of inviting our distinguished commentators in the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure of inviting up on stage our distinguished panelist, Mr. Dhani Ram Sharma, the Joint Secretary at the National Planning Commission of Nepal. He also heads the International Economic Cooperation Coordination Division of the Ministry of Finance and holds about 19 years of experience in revenue and tax administration. Our second panelist, Mr. Gyanendra Dhungana, the CEO at the Nabil Bank. He has a wealth of experience in the field of central as well as commercial banking, and with over 25 years of experience spanning across all levels of management. And having done with this privilege, I now hand over the floor to the session moderator, Mr. Joseph Sylvanus. Over to you, sir.
Shivani, can I be heard? Great. Welcome for the post-lunch session today. Very interesting topic. You've read a lot about this. I'm sure you're extremely knowledgeable. We have been able to bring together a cohort of people with diverse understanding of this subject, both international and domestic. Please remember that we are in the center of a climate crisis. Nepal, as a part of the Hindu Kush Himalayan range, is sometimes called the third pole. It's because of the amount of ice that is amassed outside of the north and south pole. We have an enemy, and that's nothing other but black carbon. It's an aerosol that goes and sits on top of the glacial mountains and increases 5x, 10x the melting and the warming of this country. Nepal itself doesn't generate too much of carbon, but we are surrounded by highly carbon generating countries. And tomorrow, if you wish, with a wizard's wand, that we become net neutral as a country by some stroke of luck, the problem is going to remain. We really have to start looking at mitigation measures. Nepal is still very small. Our journey in the capital markets, both domestic and international, is very, very rudimentary, very nascent. So today, the way we structured this next 50 minutes is we're going to have two very high-level presentations, one on the macroeconomic scenario and what are the building blocks. And the other one is going to talk about how this private sector and the DFI world come to support this country in this journey for climate finance, or greening as you call it. And then we have a panel, a very distinguished panel, and they will share their thoughts. We'll give you an opportunity to throw a few questions to them, and we'll wrap it up with the kind, gracious words of our chair for this session. So with that, can I request Teresa to deliver the keynote on how do you see it from your perspective? You've come here in 2022 itself. You have established a permanent office after a long time here in Nepal, and that itself means a lot for this country. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will make a presentation in this time.
Yes, you could.
Yes.
There is a... Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
Unfortunate.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph, and thank you very much for the organizer to be in this forum. I'm very pleased, and not only because I may contribute to the debate, and this is a great opportunity, also because it's going to allow me to introduce myself as a newcomer to Nepal. I am Teresa Davan Sanchez, and I am a resident representative to Nepal. And the IMF had an office in Nepal until 2010. Then, from different circumstances, it was discontinued. But now we are back, especially after COVID. There was a realization of a stronger engagement with countries like Nepal, and opened the demand of the authorities. We reopened the office, and I have been here for a few months. And I'm bringing to you today the macro perspective, and I think that's why my presentation be on the first position, I think it could be very helpful. I'm going to talk about Nepal from the macroeconomic perspective and how preserving macroeconomic stability is key to trigger any type of investment on any sort, but specifically for climate change. And also we will talk a little bit about climate change, how it is handled at the IMF. So this is the structure of my presentation. First of all, a little bit of a summary of what we do at the IMF on climate change, how we approach the issue, what is our responsibility, and in terms of our role and our instrument. Then and then you will see from that presentation that one key aspect is that any strategy on climate change in any country, but specifically in Nepal, will require to be done in a way that is preserving macroeconomic stability. And therefore, the second question will be, where is Nepal in terms of macroeconomic stability? Is something that is there in an economy that is recovering after COVID? And then at the end, I will finalize with how are we working right now, how we are helping Nepal to preserve macroeconomic stability that is so necessary to provide comfort to investors and to provide also a stable life to citizens. Okay, so the first thing is a little bit about climate change at the IMF. I'm sure that everybody is familiar with the IMF. It's the International Monetary Fund. We have an international organization, but we do macro. So how is climate change coming across to us? No? And the issue is that we care about climate change because it's a threat to growth and prosperity. And the IMF mandate is to preserve growth and financial stability in the world at the international level. So we had to jump and to contribute. Then the realization that this climate change is a global externality. So meaning that whatever one country does is affecting another country, as Joseph pointing out. Nepal is affected by what other countries may do or may not do. So we had to jump as well and to provide international perspective to climate change. The main conclusion of our work, and I'm inviting you to visit the IMF website, where you will find a lot of work that is analytical work, research work that is done, is that the conclusion is that in the face of these shocks, climate change is a shock that is happening, it's going to happen, it can happen anytime. Countries need to calibrate their policies, macro policies, monetary and financial, and they have to have a space to react if something happens. There is a weather conditions or any other type of natural disaster. And also because by doing that, they will maintain themselves attractive to getting inflows of investment by private sector, but even also by public sector or the governments or international organizations, because climate change is going to it could generate an important financing gap. So macroeconomic stability critical. As well, infrastructure. Climate change is bringing new challenges. The infrastructure that has been done as a routine now needs to be enhanced. This is also important. And the third and the last element is that countries need to implement policy to change behaviors in consumption, to change behavior in investment. And that's what we do. How we do that? This is a big summary of what we are doing at the IMF. At the IMF, what we do is we establish standards, we establish best practices, we establish advice about how countries should do this type of policy. First of all, mitigation, meaning reducing emission, changing the behavior, how this is done through carbon taxes, through taxation, making the use of fuel more expensive, revisiting the policy of subsidies, and then making sure that the right price of fossil fuels is reflected in the price, regulation, and etc. This is one area where we are working heavily with country members. The second is the adaptation, that is to develop financial instrument, investment instrument for countries to protect themselves from natural resources, and then I listed there a few new hedge instruments that they are coming along, like a catastrophe bonds, green bonds. Most of them are now quite developed in advanced countries. The idea is to make sure that low-income countries or emerging markets are also getting into this new instrument. And the third element is how we make sure that countries can transition to a low-carbon economy, and that could be done through the financial sector, making sure that the financial sector supervision, regulation is done in a way that is capture the risks that are coming from climate change, that companies and banks, they disclose the risk to climate change if they are involved in a project that is exposed to climate change, and also making, for instance, a stress test in the banking system that is not only a stress test about growth or interest rate or exchange rate, that also had the risks of climate change, and etc. So this is the areas in which we are working with all of the countries in the world. But on the top of that, and this is something very important I would like to present today, because maybe it's not that well known to the public in general. The IMF last year decided to create a trust. It's called the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. Trust meaning it's a bunch of money available for investment and for project and for whatever countries need to do to engage in long transformation in their countries. Originally, this trust that we call the RST was more intended to COVID, to recovery for COVID, but then was expanding also to climate change. And the idea is that to use as a funding the special drawing rights, probably you are familiar with that, the SDR allocation, that was $660 billion that the IMF distributed among country members last year. The idea was that some countries, the advanced countries, they don't need that money. They are doing well. They could put this money on a voluntary basis in this trust. The idea is to put together a trust that could be around $40 to $50 billion. And countries, mostly low-income countries or emerging markets, they can draw from this trust through loans that are with a long maturity, 20 years, a very long grace period, and a very interesting interest rate. So this is a very good initiative. As you probably have seen in the news, Bangladesh is one of the countries that now is in discussion with the IMF to get access to this trust fund for them to use for climate change. So this is the issue about how we work in general. And what I want you also now is to go a little bit to Nepal. So the message from the first part of my presentation is that macroeconomic stability is very important. And then the idea is that, so what Nepal is doing? I mean, are we okay? How are we working? No? So the situation in Nepal is an economy that is recovering after COVID. COVID was a major shock with negative growth. Now we are projecting to go back to potential. This is what the graphic is representing, because there was proactive policy by the government, mostly on the monetary side, also on taxation and social program, and this is a very good thing. But the issue is that this recovery is taking place in a context in which we have other shocks, no? Apart from climate change, unfortunately, life is very uncertain. We have now the war in Ukraine. Increasing commodity prices is pushing up inflation, and this is a major concern, no? Although, fortunately, the budget is not that expansionary, it's quite prudent, and is helping substantially. Despite of this, or because of that, I would say because of the Ukraine war, imports are growing very fast, as we know, and they are moderating lately, and remittances have remained quite strong and volatile but sustained. But this, unfortunately, still the deficit of the current account deficit remains very high, and this is a concern. The international reserves remains at adequate level, but there is a concern that they have been declining since September last year. On the positive side, the policy implemented by the government are helping in the right direction. The first thing is the monetary policy. The Nepal National Bank started this year in February to move to a more neutral type of monetary with an increase in interest rate in February, as you probably remember. There was another monetary tightening in July 2022. And so this is helping to moderate domestic demand and helping moderating the growth on imports and inflation. And then on the budget, we have a budget that targets a deficit that is in line with what is required for sustainability, but there are some risks there because there are some kind of ambition on the expenditure side, and we have to be mindful of potential risks. So, given that, the situation, the last two slides of my presentation, and I'm finishing, is that how are we working with Nepal, how the IMF is working with Nepal to preserve macroeconomic stability, because as I explained, this is critical to keep this everything under control. So what we do is that through the implementation of the extended credit facility, the IMF program, for that, we conduct reviews. So we sit down with the government, the authorities, and we look at what is going on. This is done on a biannual basis. We are now in the middle of the first review. Remember that the IMF program was approved in January this year. Then we look at what we call performance criteria. Where are the level of international research? Where is the deficit? And etc. And other structural benchmarks that are related to reform. And what are these reforms? Well, the reforms, at first sight, you may look like they are not related to climate change, but they are, because they are reforms that are aimed at strengthening the policymaking and strengthening the institution, the transparency, and the governance. And this is critical to attract investment and to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. So I only listed a few examples. No? On the transparency and governance, we are working to make the Nepal National Bank stronger, much modern, by reforming the NRB Act to bring that to line with best international practices. This is critical. You have a strong central bank, then everything is handled. All shocks are handled very well. Then reporting all of the tax and customs exemption is very important as well. A lot of investment are happening in Nepal. They have a lot of tax exemption, tax holiday. They may be required for attracting this investment, but we need to know how much this is cost, how much is the revenues that are foregone, and how much this is costing to the citizen. Then on fiscal sustainability, we are also working with the government on making sure that we are aware of the potential fiscal risks. What that means, fiscal risk? Contingencies, things that are happening, guarantees that are signed, operation by the SIIF, for instance, that if they materialize, they may create a problem in the budget. It's better to have them accounted for, and also to have a good forecasting on cash flow and what is the borrowing of the government, what are the needs, how this is going to be done. And then finally, improving the efficiency of the public investment. Under execution of public investment is an issue in Nepal. We don't want that because we want to attract investors and we want to make sure that everybody is happy with the execution of the public investment, so we are working on that too. And finally, strengthening banking supervision and regulation to make the financial sector stronger, more transparent, and with better asset quality. And then I'm finishing. Okay, so conclusion, the IMF, we have an important role in helping countries to address climate change. And as you can see in my presentation, it's mostly about keeping macroeconomic stability. This is key. Second, policies that change the behavior of people, consumption and investment. We need the reallocation of resources in the economy, and also to make sure that the country is attractive, no? To flows that are needed to close the financing gap. No? In Nepal, this is done through the implementation of the standard credit facility that is now present in place in Nepal, that has this goal, preserving financial stability, making sure that the level of research is adequate, financial sector is strong, and etc. And a lot of technical assistance that we are doing with the government in different areas that to make sure that the program is implemented successfully. Okay, so I'm done. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward for this question of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Please. So you can see Teresa has a lot on her plate, and she has come equipped with all the skills of transforming Nepal She spoke about macroeconomic stability, fiscal prudence, discipline. They've already extended the ECF to us, and there's a program which monitors very closely some of these control panels. What we learned today is there is also the RSF, where Nepal can potentially draw on this. The SDR rate today, a 3-month SDR rate, is very cheap. SDR stands for special drawing rights, and Nepal as a country can draw on it. And we need concessionary finance. We need patient capital. And with IMF having a rep office here, we certainly welcome you, and I'm sure there's lots to work in this space. Thank you. We now go across to an area where we're going to be requesting Dhruba, who's come in from India, to speak to us about some of his experience that he's worked in geographies similar to ours. He's covered Nepal in the past. He's a World Banker for several years, and he brings a lot of support in the area of climate mitigation, climate financing, and greening. Dhruba, would you like to walk us through your presentation? Yes, from the podium, please.
Good afternoon, namaste, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this all-important session. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Government of Nepal and the Board of Investment. And the session that I'm going to talk on, I have a presentation. But before I get into the presentation, this all started with Mr. Piyush Shah talking to me, Joseph talking to me on international climate finance for Nepal. And as I talk here, sir, today, I am talking here and with the Finance Ministry and the Planning Commission here, and the CEO of an important Nepal bank, I think, and thanks to Teresa, the macroeconomic presentation, and thanks for adding the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which is something which I had not covered in my presentation. But before I get on to the first, sorry. My presentation covers the following 4 areas, but what I want to start with is, why did this all happen? Before you all look into this graph and basically think that we track, okay, by way of introduction, though I had forgotten, I work for a climate policy initiative, which is a philanthropic institution, not for profit, working in the area of tracking and enabling more climate finance. Now, if you look at this graph, what does this tell you? It tells you that over so many years, we have just reached about an annual investment, and this is a global issue, in climate for about 632 billion. But what is required, you can see it is in trillions and thousands of trillions, billions of dollars. Now that's the gap at the global level. And what is this? What is climate finance and where does this come from? I think I'll take half a minute to explain this, or rather simplify this. Sustainable, climate, green are often kind of used interchangeably, but they have some specific meanings. And today's talk, what I'll be talking of, is more on what is international climate finance and where did it come from. And to start with, I'll be wearing a hat almost as if it's Government of Nepal, because this is where the problem lies. So sustainable finance is everything that covers the sustainable development goals. Climate finance is pretty specific. Where is the problem? Joseph started by talking about carbon. Yes, carbon is the problem. Carbon dioxide is the problem. And that's reducing emissions is what is mitigation. And adapting to what is happening is adaptation. And when you have adaptation built in long term, we call it resilience. But let's look at the problem from Nepal's point of view. Minuscule contribution to emissions, very, very minuscule contribution to emissions. But what is happening from vulnerability? I was hearing the session, and the session manager today was talking about Nepal being one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. So is India, by the way. But being one of the vulnerable countries in the world, where is the issue? The issue is, even if the contribution has been minuscule to the problem, the impact, and Joseph was also referring to black carbon, forget the black carbon. It's, even if it is a pertinent problem, there are even higher problems of what we are going to see. It's about what? It's about more water, more rain, more heat, more floods, more cyclones. So what are we seeing? The impact of climate change of a CO2 or a GHG emissions is going to translate down to what? It's going to translate down to what Theresa referred, fiscal stability, macroeconomic stability. What does the public finance and what does the government do? It has to invest more to just save lives. It has to invest more in cyclone shelters. It has to invest more in preventing floods. It has to invest more in saving people from floods. And I can just go on and on. That's what is vulnerability. Where does money come from that? When we go back and track, this is a graph which tells you globally where is money coming from and where is money going to what sectors. It does cover both mitigation and adaptation. I'll have to be a bit quick because the time is limited, but I want to draw attention to the problem. Total finance flows to South Asia is of this order of magnitude of what you can see on this graph and saying there's a 31 billion climate finance flows to South Asia. South Asia is home to the most highest share of people in poverty across any region of the world. So when we are talking of climate change, let us not forget there are millions of people without access to quality electricity. So once we are handling climate change of mitigation, we have to also understand the development needs of the people of South Asia, where poverty is the highest, probably higher or as equal to sub-Saharan Africa. Now that leads us to a second question. To LDCs, less developed countries in Asia, all of that, 61% of the funding goes there. 25% of the funding comes to LDC. Nepal has received a reasonable amount of funding, but what is Nepal's NDC requirement? NDC requirement is far, far higher. Far, far higher than what is either getting invested in or what is being received. Now I'll come to, are international climate funds enough? It's an important slide to bring into. Where did this problem start and where does the solution started? You know, it started in 97. We had a Kyoto Protocol, which ended in 2012. There was 3 years of not so clear clarity, and then Paris happened, essentially in the Paris Agreement, and then you have NDCs of so many countries committing. But there are two things in Paris which have not got sorted out till now. One is international climate finance, and one is, it's called Article 9, and one is Article 6, which is about how do transfer of these carbon credits happen in terms of what you save here in carbon versus what is paid for. It took 5 years for the world to decide that we will make the rules. So that was Glasgow last year. So let us recognize these 2 points, and I draw your attention to the international climate finance problem. The international climate finance, it dates back to 2010 Copenhagen COP, where it was committed that $100 billion would be provided by the Global South through a mechanism. And that mechanism essentially was set up in Paris as the Green Climate Fund. But what does the total money Green Climate Fund have as? This is a listing of all possible sources that a developing country can access, But I'm quickly getting back to an important point. Look at the total size of the total money available from all international finance sources. And what I mean by international finance source is public finance to which government of Nepal can use for making investments primarily in adapting to climate change, because that's where public investment, public expenditure needs to go. Notwithstanding this, I will also address Joseph's point of how markets can come into, how financial markets and banks can come into in investing in renewable energy projects, in pump storage, in public-private partnerships of resilient infrastructure. For sure, there is potential for private participation. But we'll have to recognize where the governments of these vulnerable countries and what are they faced with. They're faced with a situation where there is a need for higher public expenditure. And that public expenditure is not necessarily a part and did not get factored in from their revenues which are coming in. And this is something which is happening, and this is all vulnerable countries have to face. Is there international climate funds enough over there? $40 billion. When you are talking of 40 billion, what is the size of GCF? GCF is 9 billion, it's managed to disburse in 7 years 2.6 billions. So what are we talking of from a differential scale? What in the amount of international climate finance? This is a mechanism not yet sorted out. Not yet sorted out by the global fraternity. So I'm just laying it clear that while these sources are available, these sources that you see up on the screen, each of them direct themselves towards a great effort towards adaptation. GCF covers both adaptation and mitigation. Some of them are directed more towards mitigation, some of them are directed towards adaptation. But the scale of the problem versus the money available is way completely out of whack. And that's important for the world to recognize, and the impact on less developed countries is going to be, vulnerable countries, going to be significant. Disbursement are international climate funds the same, sufficient? What can Nepal do? So, there is no rocket science that I've spoken here. We have to get back to the same sources which are available in terms of DFIs. We have to get back to the project preparations that I can see are happening as far as public-private partnership projects are concerned. The projects have to be designed and they have to be put up for funding but this is not necessarily climate finance. This is development finance. Part of development finance would get channelized into climate finance subsequently. But we do still need an international mechanism by which this climate finance, which gets directed incrementally for governments to be able to adapt to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruba. I think that was very succinct and that was very clear. And those of you who've been picking up the track, what did we leave you with? We gave you a 5,000 feet view about how does all of this look from an IMF standpoint for macroeconomic stability. Some thoughts around how Nepal could draw on some of those special drawing rights, etc. Dhruba set out and demystified this conversation for us. And quite clearly, it's not enough. Nepal, in October last year, put out its NDCs, and the gap assessed at that time was 24 billion US. We won't talk about where we got there. We're already now working towards COP27, which starts in November in Egypt. What has happened between these two conferences? Where does Nepal stand up on its own feet and start accessing these global flows? Answer from Dhruba is short and sweet. Not now, maybe later. So we have now this panel of distinguished people from the government, the Planning Commission. Dhaniramji has actually served in the Ministry of Finance, so he comes with that vintage. I'm going to ask you this question. As our journey between the Glasgow summit and the one which is to happen, what do you think Nepal has done to start its own journey on the meeting the NDCs? And therefore, we spoke about fiscal prudence and other issues. What do you feel is realistic? The strategy, the documents all look good, but let's talk realistically. What can our country achieve? Can you switch that on?
Thank you, Joseph. Let me start with some data. If we go to the budget, government budget of current fiscal year, the total budget is 17.93 billion US, around 1793 billion Nepalese rupee. Against that, the climate budget, we have climate budget coding system. So according to that coding system, we have around 6 billion USD is going for climate-related activities, directly or indirectly. That is the total, within the total budget is around 35% of the total budget. So if we further decompose this data, the government is financing 80% out of this 6 billion USD, and 20% is financing by the development partners. This is what our climate budget coding system saying. So my point is, I think this data makes some sense. The government is giving a lot of emphasis to cope with this climate change issues, to develop the green development initiatives. So out of this total budget, I'm talking about public budget, the government have different initiatives. Our plan is clear. Our policies are clear. We have climate change policy. We have forestry conservation policy, agriculture development policy. We have NDCs for Paris Agreement. We do have Nepal adaptation plan as well. Policy, I think is in very right track. The issue is, how can we translate those initiatives, those policies into action? I think in this part we need to be focused more. We need to do a lot. How can we better design the projects? We have different kind of projects. For example, if we go to the Ministry of Forestry, we have some programs related to mitigation and adaptation. For example, Rashtrapati Surya Conservation Program. Some other conservation program. If you go to the Agriculture Ministry, we have Sustainable Agriculture Development Program. If we go to the Ministry of Energy, we have Rural Electrification Program, where the government is aiming to completely replace the traditional source of energy by renewable energy or clean energy. So if you go to the revenue policy of the government is encouraging clean transportation by giving some reduced rate in the electric transportation. These are some initiatives that government has started, and we have this assessment as well, this NDC's assessment. We have adaptation plan as well. Again, the issue is, how can we better design the projects? Because as I said in the beginning, we have climate budget coding system, but still this coding system is not enough, because still we need to go further to decompose, to code the activity level of the budget. Now it's not in activity level. Even there's some budget headings are relevant to climate issues, but within this budget heading also there are some activities.
Right.
So we need to go through this activity level, and we need to make it more accurate, so that we can get more and more reliable climate change budgeting. I think this is what I want to say, one point. And second, of course, we have different kind of climate facilities, development partners, as IMF said. She has some, the IMF has some fund, or the World Bank also have some fund. We need to better utilize those funds. But again, the issue is, If we have better project, we can get more fund we can utilize those funds. Otherwise, we cannot get those funds. This is the issue. So again, my point is, as a policy, as a program, policy, mainly policy is good, is in track, we are in track. But the problem again is, how can we reflect, how can we translate those projects into action? Similarly, this is the government side. In the private side, private sector side, because this is the big part of the economy. I think in the private sector side also, we are trying to have some innovative financing. The central bank already have this priority sector lending program.
We will come to that in a second.
To go to the hydropower sector. So, because within the total economy, private sector is a big partner. So we need to, I think in this part, private sector financing in clean energy, I think we need to do more. It's not enough. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you. So if I may summarize, you're saying the infrastructure is there, the policy is there. There are certain, there's a journey between now and creating bankable programs, crowding in your own public sector investment, and using it effectively in implementing good programs. I see the problem. But here we have a private sector captain of the largest private sector bank, I would imagine, with deep balance sheets. And you're right, the private sector has shown that it can be the engine of growth. Banks have played a big role in developing the economic agenda for this country. So, Gyanendra-ji, you're wearing your hat as the CEO. Maybe right now we speak about your own bank and then we look at the industry. Can you talk to us about what is the disruption that you're bringing? We know that there is a lack of lendable surpluses in the economy right now. It is true for the whole sector, but specifically to your bank, how do you see this entire, because you're a very important stakeholder in crowding in capital to good bankable projects.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. I think there is no need of mentioning the role of the banks in economic development. And that is especially, today we are talking about the raising the climate fund. That is mostly from international investors, because our market, the bond market, is not that much developed. In that front, I think Neville is the pioneer who, I think, in fact, we are practicing that the ASRM guideline of NRB before they have issued it. And that way, Nabil has done a lot of product and process, is greening the product and process before the NRB has issued the guideline. And similarly, still in Nepal, till the green bond guideline has not been issued, there is no such any guideline, but still Neville is trying to raise international green finance by issuing a bond denominated in INR. That is under the process. We have already applied to the central bank, and that will be listed in the London Stock Exchange. The only difficulty we are facing is, till now we are not having any country rating. I think that is still going on since so many years in the finance ministry. The lack of country ratings, somebody has to give a guarantee. Otherwise, the investor is always hesitant to invest into the bonds issued by a bank of Nepal, whose country rating is not there, and around 2.5% additional premium we need to pay. But we have a benefit that our currency is pegged with IC. That's why, like the Masala bond in India, we are trying to issue a bond which is denominated in INR, but our liability will be fixed to the INR currency. Maybe in near futures, we will be the first bank to issue that kind of bond. That is our effort that we are trying to bring in the green finance in Nepal.
Thank you. It's very good to hear that Nabil would potentially bring out a sustainable green bond. For those of you who have been watching this space, you would realize that there are a few better governed banks, and I use the word governance deliberately, because we have now been able to postulate a benefits case for ESG, ENS. We are able to clearly show the correlation between better governed banks, banks that are looking at ENS, as a personal capacity for environmental and social safeguards. The central bank has brought that out as a guideline. It's now mandatory. And you can, I won't name the banks, but it's very easy to see some of them already receiving climate finance, some of them receiving a lot of DFI support, unsecured external commercial borrowings. So that is a case that we can put aside. It's a clear-cut case, and everyone else now needs to get onto the bandwagon to ensure that if they want to access the international capital market, and they are doing it in droves, there's a very good, healthy pipeline for commercial banks accessing DFI credits. I think all banks need to come up to that speed. So again, back to you, Gyaninderji. Now you've obviously said you're the poster boy, Naveel is up there, but wear the hat for the Cat A and Cat B banks. What is your prognosis? What do you feel? What is the industry looking at?
No, industries, I think most of the banks are now in a similar platform because the guideline is mandatory. And not only that, the banking system in Nepal, our major portfolio, that is mostly we are driven by the regulation-driven portfolio. Our green portfolio is mostly regulation-driven. That is hydro, or we can call it agriculture, or whatever, tourism. And these all sectors are in a very much threat of the climate change. Whether you talk about the hydro, a lot of risks are there of floods, the landslides, and even the mountain is melting. So we are not doing nothing wrong because of some activities of the so-called the huge economy. I think we are facing the problem. Our portfolio, the overall banking portfolio I'm talking about, the regulated, the directed portfolio, is also most affected sector from the climate change. That's why now the guideline, and on top of that our own experience, we have integrated our credit risk management system to analyze the environmental risks into our overall process so that such risk will be minimized. I'll take some example, like in some of the industry we are even asking for the energy audit, whether you can save the energy or not. That kind of covenant we have started practicing. Similarly, in some of the industries, we are even financing for changing the layout, financing for more energy efficient equipment. That kind of practice is now common in the banking system. That's, I think, pretty good to start in Nepalese banking system. But till 3-4 years back, it was only the regulator driven. Now it is driven by the business cause.
Very good. Thank you. So you're saying that banks are catching up?
Yes.
As an industry, and obviously banks are ahead, we understand, in this journey for accessing both domestic and international capital. Dhruba, I'd like to come to you in this context, because this is a typical conundrum that all emerging markets face, nothing different from us. Given that we don't have fiscal buoyancy, and you clearly alluded to the fact that we are not going to be getting international investors. Maybe you will get development finance, but but for real climate infrastructure change and mitigation, what is the 3-4 things that Nepal needs to keep in its mind? We have people here from the government and sitting in the audience. So what is your prognosis for them?
No, thanks, Joseph. Thanks. Quite a comprehensive, all-encompassing question. So I was talking public finance then, so let me now. When you're talking of international investment, what are the few things that are required? International investment in green. Now, I think the discussion on being able to issue green bonds, at least banks to be able to issue green bonds where you're tapping into international institutional investor who, by the way, have a commitment to invest in green. That is thanks to a GFANS partnership. What you're basically seeing is the international institutional investor has now a commitment to necessarily invest in a share of the portfolio in green. So the movement towards, whether it is called a masala bond or a Everest bond, as long as it is, it's pegged to the rupee, foreign exchange risk is manageable or not much or probably negligible, that would be a great way, because on the liability side, as you raise green, your deployment on the asset side is going to go to green, to renewable, to charging stations, to EVs. So that's one channel. The second thing that I can think of is, as the banks evolve their definition of green, as the central bank evolves the taxonomy of green, that helps interchangeable investment to acquire that confidence on equivalence of standards, which means that the international financial market, therefore the regulator over here builds in confidence, the central banker builds in confidence that the money is going to green, and it is not individually bank defined. So I talk of green taxonomy. The third thing that I can talk of is, in trying to move more intermediation to green, it's probably talking about creating an incentive on the lending side. And I'm talking private finance now, not talking public finance. I'm talking private finance, both. How does financial intermediation, either through the banks or through the capital markets? Now you need more money from the banking system to get into green than what it normally does. Therefore, is there a way you could incentivize and increase green finance? Now that can be done by way of quotas, by way of priority sector lending, by defining what is green, and therefore ensuring that a bank has to put certain amount of money in green. Finally, that's an extreme possibility, but even the regulator can think of reducing risk weights for green. So when you reduce risk weights for green, you're basically, what you're getting down to is you are incentivizing the movement of money in intermediation towards your local domestic intermediation. And I heard, sir, from you that of the climate investments that are happening in the country, 80% is public investment, right? So 80% is public investment, 80% is domestic investment. About the rest of, if you actually look at the market, you'll find international finance contributing to a minuscule. So there are two things. I have to increase international, both domestic intermediation and attract international finance, which can be done through green bonds and capital markets. And I need to move my financial sector regulation to incentivize or shift my intermediation to green. Thank you.
I think that's...
Joseph, I just
yes.
get on to Mr. Durva's point. Yes, he's very right. The regulator or the central bank can incentivize the banks, like one of the ways you have suggested. They can ease the capital requirement in green portfolio. Similarly, the central bank can provide the concession loans or refinancing of the green portfolio when now they are withdrawing after the COVID era is finished. They are doing other way around. If they increase that refinancing and concession loan and ease the capital requirement, that definitely will help to incentivize the banks.
And the public financial institution can borrow internationally, because let's understand the cost of money for a public financial institution is always lesser internationally than a private financial institution.
Yes, the
so
credit spreads are lower. Yes.
Therefore, a wholesale public financial institution, sovereign government-owned public financial institution borrows internationally an ADB or a World Bank line, which can be disintermediated and refinanced for investments by commercial banks. That's a great point, sir. So you pool in money which is directed towards green, and then you refinance that downstream through the banking sector. That's a great point.
That's very good. That's a very healthy conversation. And coming quickly back to Teresa before we wrap this up, how can you and IMF and your extended arms make Nepal a trusted investment destination? We need to sell Nepal overseas too. Yes, you are looking inward on all our fiscal prudence and our policies, but how do we sell Nepal to the world? Can you switch that on?
Hello? Now it's working.
Did I?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a very complex question and very broad, and we have to be modest in where we can contribute, because this is something, it's a collective effort. It's not only the IMF, the World Bank, it's the government, it's the private sector, it's everybody working together. But definitely, One thing that I think Nepal should focus and is focusing, and then we are working closely with the authorities, is to get the basic right. I mean, as regards macroeconomic management. I think, in my experience, investors always look at a country that is reliable, that is well managed, that there are mechanisms, policy making, and that are rule-based, and you know how they're going to react in the face of a shock. No? That's basically the idea. And therefore, I think that the IMF program, the Standard Credit Facility, that is a 3 years, so we are just at the beginning, provide a very good roadmap to establish this foundation. No? I mean, I'm talking about strengthening the Nepal National Bank. I'm talking about making banking supervision and regulation stronger for us to have a better information about the asset quality of the banking system, that Nepal needs a little bit of catching up with best international practices. Talking about that public investment is executed at the good rate. This is critical. And right now we are facing problem of under execution. We need to understand why, and we have to fix that at the public sector. But that has a spillover on private sector. So the targeting to have this basic right and getting a mechanism to preserve the macroeconomic stability that Nepal has. Nepal is a country with a low level of debt, public debt that is comfortable, has a very strong volume of reserves, is recovering for COVID, has a lot of strong points that needs to be preserved, building buffers to respond to shocks, and making sure that there is an environment that is enabling from foreign investment. I think if this is done, Nepal has a huge potential, and investor will come.
Thank you. That's kind words. We have to improve our climate of doing business. So if I may summarize this part of the conversation, very clearly, there is international climate finance available, development finance available. Nepal has to create the roadblock, to create the bridge to reach these places. Quite clearly, the private sector, especially the banks, maybe some of the captains of industry, are ahead in this space, because disintermediation of the capital markets is already happening. The commercial banks are way ahead in this game in accessing development finance, climate finance. It's time that some of our hydropower companies, and maybe that's happening in the parallel session across, also reach out to the domestic and international capital markets for disintermediation, because they are strong by themselves. I have some very strong hydropower companies who are developers, and we should all try it, because quite clearly, coming out from the government, they have the building blocks. They don't see the bankable programs and projects coming through. And even if it's happening at its own pace. Right now, the idea is to be disruptive, be innovative, press on the gas to ensure that we are catching up. Otherwise, there's always going to be a divide between what other countries are doing and where Nepal is getting its act together. At that stage, I think it's very important for us to bring in the chair for this session, Mr. Dangal, to talk to us about your thoughts. How do you see this playing out? And in your own perspective as the Revenue Secretary for the government, because it's all what Dhruva mentioned, where do I get my sources of public finance, which is buoyant, which is growing, which I can repurpose into supporting the development needs of our country, not just climate, but just development needs of our country. So please speak to us about that.
Should I conclude?
Your views, and then you can conclude. Excuse me, I know we are running short on time. Can we take a few questions from the audience? And that's going to make your life a little more difficult, but we'll take a few questions. I need to get you a mic, I guess. Can you? We'll share some of these mics, perhaps. Let's make it 3 questions. Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
thank you. My name is Krishna Gewali. I work in the government until 8 years ago. At one time, I also happened to be the environment secretary. So this issue fascinates me. Currently, I'm working as a policy advisor to what is called Nepal Urban Resilience Program, being supported by UK8 FCDO. My question is to Dhruvaji. His presentation was very interesting, but some of the things he said was intriguing. In the sense that, when he was talking about potential sources of climate financing for a particular country like Nepal, he highlighted the loan component. But political, economically speaking, this is very sensitive to a country like ours. As you also testified in your presentation, Nepal is one of the countries very vulnerable sort of victim, one of the most vulnerable countries in the world with minimal impact on carbon pollution. So the political economy risk is very sensitive. And you are also talking about the grant component, which is potentially available through some windows like Green Climate Fund. But that demands quite a lot of quality projects in which I seek support. I seek response from Dhani Ramji, who is heading the Planning Commission. And we need to better prepare, better design the projects which are suitable, appropriate, and not only eligible but qualified for climate financing. And that needs quite a lot of homework on our part. We are also working at the local level through our program, and all the municipalities, which are the cornerstone in the federal Nepal of designing and implementing climate adaptive projects in the country, they do not have the capacity, the institutional capacity, and the knowledge and the skills and all sort of things at the local level. And so is the scenario at the provincial level. So loan is very tricky for us. And recently, if I remind you, most of the people in the audience, there has been a controversy in accepting a loan-funded program. I think it was from the World Bank, which also which does have the component to develop the infrastructure. And infrastructure lending is absolutely justifiable also in terms of our policy that is allowed by our development cooperation mobilization policy. But since that is some of the loan money is also going to be funding the activities for mitigation and adaptation and the resettlement of the climate victims which have been victimized by climate-induced disasters.
Can I, in the interest of time, keep it short? Because he needs to respond
Yes.
to you.
So this financing has to be balanced in such a way that Nepal is not only eligible and qualified, but that is justified through the political economic point of view, so that there will be no implementation of it.
Thank you, sir. We'll hold it there. Dhruva?
Thank you, sir. But thanks. You made a comment. Actually, there was no question. Now, the only question that I can think of I kind of completely agree with you. Now, having said that, from an international climate finance sources, if grants were to be there, in my experience, grants are usually available for technical assistance, capacity building, institutional development, project preparation. That all is grants, even from these sources which I have mentioned. But when it comes to brick and mortar of physically building a watershed, a cyclone shelter, or physical project-built infrastructure, for that matter, a road or a renewable energy project, that usually does not come in from a grant. A part of it may come, but as Nepal moves into a middle-income country, it will have to be from international development finance, could be a loan. There can be international development finance investments in projects from an IFC, which will be an equity investment. But the grant component is usually soft technical assistance. So loans have to be balanced for sure, and I have no disagreement with you. The political economy in terms of borrowing does not need to get disturbed. But if the public, and what sources I was talking of is, well, essentially it's a part of preparation of a developed world to be paid to the developing world is essentially that could have been grants, but I don't know how that will get structured. But I guess there is some mechanism still under discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And before we take the next question from the gentleman there, I just want to tell everyone that the international finance taxonomy has changed for sustainable finance. It has moved from just helicopter money coming in for one-time benefit. It has moved to returnable grants. It's moved to debt. It's moved to unsecured debt and various structures of debt and back into equity. Nepal has to wake up. If we have to really start putting out bankable projects with good IRRs and reasonable years of return, we have to start striving to put better programs and projects to access that. That's my only thought. Sir, would you like to go for next?
Yeah. My name is Lasse Rinkus. I'm with the Global Green Growth Institute. Fascinating discussion. I'll try to be very targeted. Just a comment, the $100 billion from Copenhagen in 2019 is not just talking about government funds, but also private funds. It's not, the governments had said for a long time they cannot pony up with 100 billion. So I think this is important to realize. Another issue, and not to remove optimism, but the pension funds in Europe that are interested in green projects, they are also looking for returns on these projects. We are working with some of these funds, and it's important, and that's one point. Bankable projects, in addition to a good environment for private business, is important, and there are sometimes shortage of bankable projects for multilaterals, but also for private banks. My question is a new instrument, which is debt for climate change swaps. IMF is looking at this. Maybe you could give us some insights. Do you think this instrument could be relevant for Nepal? I just want to expand the toolbox because, as you were saying correctly, we had carbon finance, we have swaps, we have different drawing rights. So this instrument is being, at least at the research department at IMF, being talked about quite a bit. And I think also the CPI is also looking at these swap instruments. So are they any good for Nepal? What would it take to use these instruments?
Who would like to take that question? Dhruva, would you like to give it a shot? Are you there? Can you use this one?
Hello, thank you. I'll stay out of the 100 billion. Yes, public and private, but the mechanism has not been established as yet. We do not know. But leaving that aside, debt for climate swaps. We at Climate Policy Initiative, we worked on this paper and we put out the model, but that's for highly indebted countries globally, typically, where climate action can be substituted for debt waiver. Now, what happens is when you talk of pension funds, yes, they are going to invest, but then I'll go back to Joseph's point. You need bankable projects. You may not need, I need to address the credit rating portion. But when you're looking at investments which is not into the sovereign, you're looking at investment in corporate, that may not necessarily need a sovereign credit rating for an investment to happen in a project. That is one. Coming back to debt but there were no takers, sir. The point is, this was socialized across the globe, across many investors, and it did include both institutional investors and sovereign funds. But there were very few takers for debt for climate swaps. If you could, I can share that structure and that model with you. And if it can be further socialized, we tried socializing it across the board, but it still lies as a concept. But I do agree with you on the concept of debt for climate swaps. And that's one mechanism which will help more climate action in low-income countries. Thank you.
We take note of that, sir. Thank you. Prateek, and then finally Upendra.
Hello, I am Pratik Pradhan, Vice President at Buttal Power Company. So it's more from the hydropower perspective. Basically, looking at the risks that we're looking at developing hydropower, say we have a bankable project as per the standard norms of, say, government Nepal, and we do have bankable project, as I said, the financing. So having the climate experts, assessors, assessing the project, then we see there's a marginal increment of 10% in terms of looking at the future of hydrology and all the risk of the floods. And this additional cost, is this something that we can get funded from the Climate Trust or Climate Resilient Fund? I mean, International Climate Fund at a kind of very nominal price that we can come to the bank saying, okay, you have done a bankable. We have done the assessing from the climate perspective, looking at, say, 50 years under, because though the project is licensed for us only for, say, 30-year period, but the infrastructure has to live for almost 100 years. So then it's a question of the risk in future. So is it something that added cost can be kind of, accessed at a very nominal price from International Climate Fund or Climate Trust that the IMF has been mentioning?
Let me answer that, if you don't mind, please. Though it is, IMF's intervention is normally G2G. You're a private sector developer. This is the area for blended finance. Now, blended is the right solution for you because you're trying to de-risk a certain element in the project, which is the long-term viability of the river basin. As long as you have a cumulative river basin assessment on ESIA, etc., you can ensure that the DFI sitting in this room and somewhere not here, plus a combination of private sector bankers can put to a simple blended finance solution for you to take out that element of the risk so that, you won't even have the 10 bips of increased interest rate. You will have, because you're ticking off all the boxes on climate adaptation, etc., mitigation in this case, because you're generating clean and green hydropower, you're taking care of the environment and the societies which are in the river basin. So technically, you have a great project, and that's the reason why I say bankable projects, because this is exactly, VPC in this case is willing to come with the project. It's an ideal pilot case for a blended finance program, and I don't see why we can't structure that.
Can I add to his question? Your question was the incremental risk which comes because of climate, and that was your question. Yeah, and that's a very, very valid question, because this is an incremental risk, therefore your price is going up, and this is a long-term project. He's right in saying it's a climate-positive project, but your problem is there is an incremental climate risk which is not priced in. Okay. Currently, my limited answer to you is, this is a risk which is transferable to insurance. This is a risk which is transferable to insurance, and that too parametric insurance, which we do not have in this part of the world today, which is essentially climate risk insurance. Now, when climate risk insurance plays for the disaster which will come in, then your project becomes bankable. So while positive, you're trying to address the incremental climate risk, which possibly can be transferred to insurance.
Thank you. We'll take a last question from Pratik in the interest of time, because we want to close this session. Please.
Thank you, Joseph. Joseph, you started your question referring COP26 and COP27. I remember last year during COP26, our Prime Minister committed to net zero by 2045. If we were to commit and achieve that target, huge investment is required in this country, and many other policy initiatives are required. So my question to Dhaniramji and Dangalji is, do we have a roadmap to 2045, how we are going to reach net zero and other policy initiatives? And also, have we made an assessment of how much fund is required? Because huge fund is required while we transition our economy to decarbonizing our economy to renewable energies. So this is something
would you like to take that?
Very, very critical, I would say.
give him your... Yeah. You're there. Can you give your mic, please? Thank you. Try this.
Thank you very much. Yes, we do have assessment of NDCs by 2045. As per the assessment, we need around 36 billion USD for NDCs. Within this 36 billion USD from 2022 to 2030, for 8 years, it means average around 8 billion per year we have investment requirement for NDCs. So within this 8 billion USD, as I said in my first question answer, the government is allocating around 1 billion for direct related climate change related activities. That means we have some gap. We can see the clear gap. This is government side, and also the private side. Also, there is a financial gap. The gap is already identified. So, issue is how can we finance those gap? I think how can we fulfill this gap? The government side also, we need to more focus on revenue, or we need to mobilize those funds. The fund issue, again, I completely agree with this Krishna Gyamwali, sir. The project, how can we compete with other international projects to get those funds? This is very critical. So in this part, if we don't have some kind of consideration to design the projects, I cannot mobilize those kind of funds. One issue. And I think other development partners also, they have commitment to channelize their cooperation through this, in the perspective of this climate change activities, so we can mobilize those funds as well. And revenue, of course, is a big portion. And at the same time, private sector financing, we need to explore the new innovative financing, as we are talking about green bond, other bonds. Currently, maybe we can expand this green credit finance requirements. Currently we have private sector lending. We can expand this, or we can have better some facility for the SMEs, because SMEs are getting problem to get the loan easily because of this collateral or other some procedures. Maybe we can simplify those requirements. I think these are some options to finance those gaps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we've come to the end of this question and answer session. I'm so sorry some of the questions have not been answered, but may I now request the chair of this session to again give your thoughts and wrap this session up. Please.
Thank you, Joseph, for your very excellent moderation. Distinguished all speakers of the session, distinguished participants, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to congratulate the moderator for the excellent moderation. I thank both the presentators for making informative and insightful presentation. Actually, during the presentation, I had the impression that we discussed a lot about the vulnerability of the climate risk vulnerability of the Nepal and need of extra investment for the reducing the climate-based risks in our country. Since our climate-induced risk is increasing and the cost of development project is increasing day by day, and our need for the development also changing. So our internal revenue mobilization is not enough to address those needs. That's why today the theme on the unleashing investment potential for economic transformation conducted by Investment Board of Nepal. I think this is very, very relevant in our context. So I thank Investment Board of Nepal for organizing this kind of very important program in our context. Many things has already been discussed regarding the climate, the contribution of climate emission of Nepal. Already our speakers already highlighted that Nepal is not significantly contributor for the increasing the global warming in the world, but we are getting high level of exposure and vulnerability due to that kind of climate change risk. That's why in the different kind of international forum, the COP and all kind of the LDCs related international forum, we have been raising our voice that we have to get support from the international community to reduce that climate related risk. I think to increase the climate financing, government of Nepal has been taken different kind of initiatives, especially on the leadership of the Ministry of Finance. We have initiated this the sovereign credit rating also, but due to this the COVID pandemic, with the support of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, we have initiated this program, and we also formed the steering committee and working committee. But due to this the COVID, we could not do the more progress. But we again we start these initiatives, and we will come up with the final conclusion of that rating. And our speakers already highlighted that we are focusing on the issuing the green bond and other kind of climate related instrument to get the climate financing. We also, to get the international foreign direct investment, recently government of Nepal has changes some of the provision in the hedging regulation. So we add some of the new projects in that area to cover the hedging. So these are some of the initiatives I just want to highlight in this forum. And finally, without taking much more time, I'd like to conclude that Nepal is open and determined to access international development capital in condition provided that it comes at a price relevant for an IDA country. That should be very much concessional, so that we can repay that grant and loan. So we have to find innovative ways of achieving fiscal discipline and newer forms of sustainable domestic revenues. Before I conclude, I would like to thank IBN for giving this opportunity to chair this session. And I hope this discussion was very much informative, and it was very lively and fruitful. So, and I hope that it will open the ways to initiate the new area of climate financing. So finally, I thank you all, and I declare this the closing of this session. I thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, sir. Can I give the stage back to Shivani?
Thank you, sir. Thank you indeed for this privilege, and thank you, in fact, from all of us for this very insightful and very enriching session. Though the topic is so that this mere 1.5 hour, I believe, wouldn't do justice to so many queries and so many, I'm sure, comments that is so, I could see so many hands raising in the members of the audience. However, it's an attempt for us to begin deliberations in sectors potential for us to tread our way towards the the potentials, the prospective areas for realizing the aspirations that we bring along and for doing the needful. Said that, members in the audience, this was our attempt to bring to you the expertise pool to see or to explore and understanding the national apparatuses in the climate finance sector vis-a-vis the architecture of global funding and vice versa. So I'm sure this has been a very enriching session for all of us. However, we'll have ample time towards the evening later. If you have more queries, I'm sure our experts will be available there to furnish to those queries and comments. Said that, we at the Investment Board of Nepal are indeed very, very much grateful and indebted to our distinguished panelists, the commentators, our distinguished chairperson, and of course our esteemed moderator for the valuable time that they have spared with us, for the insights that they have shared, and for the pool of experience and expertise they bring along. And to make it formal, my pleasure of inviting the CEO at the Office of the Investment Board of Nepal, Mr. Sushil Bhatta, to kindly come up on stage and extend our appreciation to our distinguished panel members. First and foremost, I request Mr. Bhatta to make a presentation to the session chair, Mr. Rameshwar Dangal, the Revenue Secretary at the Ministry of Finance. And this is coming from the entire IBN family and, of course, the members in the audience as a gesture of thank you for your invaluable presence and adding all the value to this great panel. Thank you, sir. Thank you indeed. With much gratitude and appreciation to the session moderator, Mr. Joseph Silvanus, the Managing Director, Dolma Consulting, for so wonderfully moderating the session and for his insightful and valued inputs, which only added to the value and of the session, in fact. To Ms. Therasha Daban Sanchez, the resident representative, IMF, coming with a lot of appreciation and gratitude from us all here. Thank you, ma'am. It was an honor to have you here with us. To our next presentator, Mr. Dhruva Purkhayastha, the Director, Climate Policy Initiative, India, coming with a lot of gratitude and appreciation for adding all the value and for honoring us with your great insights and expertise. Thank you, sir. And with much gratitude to our esteemed panelist, Mr. Dhaniram Sharma, the Joint Secretary at the National Planning Commission. Thank you, sir, for your very valued presence and for sharing with us your valued knowledge and insights. And last but not the least, with much appreciation and gratitude, Mr. Gyanendra Dhungana, CEO, Nabil Bank. It was indeed a matter of great honor and pleasure of having you and hearing your insightful words. Thank you, sir. May I now request the members in the panel to kindly step forward along with CEO, sir, for a quick photo opportunity. And can we hear a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, thanking the distinguished panel. Thank you. And yes, of course, to the members in the audience, thank you so much for sparing your valuable time, showing your interest and being a very proactive member of this entire panel. We have, in fact, spilled over the entire tea break. However, as we prepare for the next panel, it's a plenary that we all are very much looking forward to it. This is a matter of great pleasure to inform you that tea is waiting for you right side. I'd like to invite you all to bring along your tea and join in for the next plenary, which is going to start in about a few minutes. Thank you one more time.